Beacon Press Audio presents The Rebellious Life of Mrs. Rosa Parks by Jean Theo-Harris. This audiobook is narrated by Judith West, published by Beacon Press Audio 2024.
New introduction. Freedom fighters never retire. On February 27, 2013, President Barack Obama and Democratic and Republican congressional leaders gathered to pay tribute to the legacy of Rosa Parks. A 9-foot bronze figure of Parks was unveiled at the U.S. Capitol, desegregating Statuary Hall and immortalizing a seated Parks clutching her purse. The first full-size statue of a black person in the hall, Parks is cast in her historic bus stand, but while she looks directly forward, nothing in how she sits suggests action or refusal. Across the political spectrum, the tribute to Parks became a tribute to the country's capacity for transformation through the solitary act of a quiet woman, rather than an ongoing collective struggle. Speaker of the House John Boehner called the dedication a great way to celebrate America. The ceremony reiterated troubling stereotypes of Parks's bus stand. She did what was natural, Minority Leader Nancy Pelosi said, quoting baseball great Willie Mays in her remarks. She was tired, so she sat down. In the shadow of her bronze statue, President Obama praised Parks's singular act and laid down a charge for action rhetorically. We make excuses for inaction. But neither he nor any of his colleagues took up. Indeed, unveiling the statue was treated as an act of racial justice in itself, the ceremony a stand-in for more concrete action. Across town that very same day, the Supreme Court was hearing arguments in Shelby County versus Holder. The case brought by Shelby County, Alabama, amidst other voter suppression maneuvers taking place throughout the country, challenged two portions of the 1965 Voting Rights Act, Section 4B and Section 5, as no longer relevant, and sought a permanent injunction against their enforcement. These sections from the original Voting Rights Act, ratified again in 2006, laid out a formula requiring certain states and municipalities with histories of voter discrimination to clear changes in their voting procedures with the Department of Justice to ensure that they did not repress the vote. In its June 2013 decision in Shelby, the court struck down Section 4B of the Voting Rights Act as based on 40-year-old facts having no logical relation to the present day, and thus unconstitutional. So Rosa Parks was given this remarkable tribute, but many of the public statements framed her action in ways at odds with the context of her bus stand and lifelong political commitments. And this incredible distinction was bestowed on a day when the Supreme Court was taking yet another step to unravel one of the accomplishments that Parks and her comrades had struggled for decades to achieve. A memorial statue was deemed more relevant to the present day than enforced voting rights protection. In many ways, the statue dedication embodied an increasingly familiar use of civil rights history. The fable of Parks and the civil rights movement had become a national redemption story and cornerstone to the idea of a post-racial America. This framing was appealing, simultaneously sober about the history of racism, lionizing of black courage, celebratory of American progress, and slippery in masking current inequalities. Thus, the intersection of the Parks statue dedication and the Supreme Court case was not merely ironic but emblematic of a larger politics of historical memory at work for a nation that wanted to place this history firmly in the past. I wrote this book to challenge these limited stories and troubled uses of Parks and the movement. There was nothing natural or passive about what Rosa Parks did, but rather something fiercely determined. It was not a singular act, but part of her larger, lifelong history of activism, a string of acts of bus resistance in the years preceding her stand, and a collective uprising following her arrest that led to a mass movement in Montgomery. To the end of her life, Parks believed the struggle for racial justice was not over, and she continued to press for more change in the United States. I spent years researching and writing this biography, all while a store of Rosa Parks's papers, photographs, and other material effects, priced at $6 to $10 million, languished without a buyer in a Manhattan auction house, given to it by a Michigan probate court to sell because of a dispute over her estate. Guernsey's auction allowed no scholars to assess the materials, a decision that treated Parks unlike other historical figures. On August 28, 2014, the Howard G. Buffett Foundation purchased the Rosa Parks archive for $4.5 million. Buffett had read an article about Parks's effects having been stuck in storage for years without a buyer, and thought about what Rosa Parks would want, which would be to preserve what's there for the public's benefit. 2 weeks later, the foundation announced it would give the papers and photographs to the Library of Congress on a 10-year loan. On February 4, 2015, that collection of 7,500 manuscript items and 2,500 photographs opened to the public. It includes letters to and from Rosa Parks to her mother and husband, including some written during the Montgomery bus boycott and in 1957 to 1958, when Parks worked at Hampton Institute. Notes from speeches she gave during and after the boycott, as well as shards of personal writings, various notebooks and datebooks she kept with addresses of supporters, tax statements and other financial records, medical bills, church materials, labor buttons from the 1940s, family albums, flyers, programs, and meeting notes, particularly from her post-Montgomery political life, and decades' worth of photos of Parks. Though somewhat fragmentary, the collection offers a remarkable behind-the-scenes glimpse at Rosa Parks's life, activism, and political philosophy. A rich artifact of 20th-century Black life, the papers broadly provide much primary source material on Black migration, church life, family relations, health care, employment, and economic life, and most significant, the span of Black politics and protest in the 20th century. Going through the collection was thrilling. The papers supply answers to some questions I couldn't resolve when I wrote this book, but, more important, they add depth to a number of the arguments I begin in this book. The collection confirms and expands some of the central themes of this biography, in particular, the robustness of Rosa Parks's political analysis, the key role she played not just in catalyzing the boycott, but sustaining it, how much and how deeply she and her family suffered economically and physically in the decade after her arrest, and the breadth and substance of her political work in Detroit and in the half-century after the boycott. It requires us to grapple with her ideas and life experiences, not simply honor her symbol. I have long critiqued the ways that Rosa Parks gets fixed in a single act and not treated as a serious political thinker and lifelong activist. Like Martin Luther King Jr. and Malcolm X, Ella Baker and Angela Davis, Parks had well-developed critiques of white supremacy and thoughts on Black struggle, yet she is rarely referenced or even thought of for her political ideas. The Rosa Parks collection, first and foremost, provides an exceptional view of and reckoning with her political voice, particularly during her Montgomery years, a key theme of this book. Most of the writings and speeches that have survived appear to date from the mid to late 1950s. On scraps of paper and backs of programs, flyers, and envelopes, Parks's ideas about the system of segregation, about the toll of...
Sample complete. Ready to continue?